The 14th century was perhaps the worst century to be alive. It was there that the 100 Years' War began. It was in the 14th century that the worst pandemic in human history, the Black Death, occurred. And today we will get to know one more of the misfortunes that occurred in this period for the medieval people, the Great Famine. A climate change haunted Northern Europe with a winter that lasted 2 years, a hunger and a cold that killed people and drove families crazy, left society in crisis, causing ethics and morals to be lost. Many thought only of survival. The result of this is that in addition to deaths from cold and hunger, there was also an absurd increase in crimes and murders. With each day getting more difficult, the scenario was gradually getting more horrible. Even cases of cannibalism happened. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Diablery, and I hope all is well with each of you. In today's video, we will once again go back to the Middle Ages, experience and learn why that time was so tragic. We will talk about the Great Famine of 1315. The 13th century was one of the most prosperous in the Dark Ages. It was a very hot, sunny time, and that was very good for agriculture all over Europe. There is an estimate that for a very one seed of wheat planted, a peasant managed to harvest 7, a great number for the time. This prosperity in plantations even resulted in a population explosion, a population growth that would not be repeated for more than 500 years. But that ended in the 14th century and right at the beginning. Climate change has always occurred in the history of the world, and this one was brutal. Dark clouds hid the sun from the view of peasant plantations, especially in the northern half of Europe. It is perhaps curious and important to say that these events preceded the Black Death and the 100 Years' War. The Great Famine came first. It started at the very beginning of the 14th century, more specifically in the spring and summer of 1315. The seasons that were supposed to be the warmest and coziest actually maintained very low temperatures and intense rain loads. This made it impossible for the seeds to germinate. It prevented the crops of the rich and the poor from growing, and that was just the start. If it was cold in the summer, that was an announcement, a warning that a merciless winter was ahead. In winter, nothing is harvested or planted. The food for this season came from cured and preserved foods, and salt was the only thing that could be used at that time to preserve food. As the water did not evaporate in the summer because of the wet weather, it was impossible to extract salt from the reserves. This ended up affecting even the animals, which, without salt, also ran out of food. With no crops, no feed for the animals, no preserved food, and a promise of a dreadful winter ahead, everything indicated that horrible times were indeed approaching. Already at the end of the summer, the price of everything that was food doubled, some even tripled, as was the case with wheat, which left peasants without bread, one of their main daily foods. On the other hand, the rich The nobility, afraid of going hungry, went out to buy stocks and more stocks of grain and food already cured, which increased the scarcity even more and raised prices even more. The crisis here was already established. Medieval winter was aggressive, naturally feared because of the cold and the scarcity of food. And this time, those two elements, both the cold and the hunger, were going to get even bigger. No sooner said than done. When winter came, to satisfy their hunger, people had to go to the swamps and forests looking for edible roots, chestnuts, or even plant leaves to eat. As if that wasn't enough, floods in some regions killed people and devastated entire herds, taking what little many families had. Winter had already begun to kill, whether from cold or hunger, and the hope of those who survived was that this cruel time would pass, that with a few more months, that warm and affectionate summer would embrace people, animals, and crops again. But what they expected didn't come. In the spring and summer of 1316, the rain continued to fall and the low temperature remained. In a population already weak, despondent, hungry, the cold reached the point of hurting the bones. The wheat harvest of the few plants that managed to survive dropped from 7 to 2 seeds. The future then had to be sacrificed. The stored seeds that would be used for planting had to be consumed. The feed had already run out and there was no food for people. The animals were also slaughtered for consumption. And here comes an example of how hopelessness was already knocking at the door. Some families even sacrificed their pets, dogs and cats, to eat them. From here, everything slowly gets worse and worse. People had crossed the line of survival. Hunger would lead some individuals to commit heinous acts, either for themselves or to feed their own family. The elderly were taken to the forests and abandoned. As for the younger children, some families even sold them as slaves or servants to families with more conditions. In fact, some children were also abandoned in places of no return. See the story of Hansel and Gretel, for example. You yourself may notice that many tales and fables from this era depict abandonment, starvation, or cannibalism in some way. Little Red Riding Hood, Three Little Pigs, Hansel and Gretel. There were, in fact, people ambushing children in forests to feed on them, or committing adult murders as well. People who didn't have the courage or cowardice to commit these acts with their own family members and other people needed to find solutions in other ways. Some parents, for example, stopped eating so their children could eat. Maybe someone who didn't have the urge to commit murder would have to dig up a body, removing from the land the corpse of a neighbor who had died of starvation. One way or another, for better or for worse, in horrible attitude or at least worse, everyone had to surrender to these atrocities or difficult decisions. Those who did not surrender simply died. The peak of the famine was reached in 1317, when finally the wet weather went away, the rain stopped and summer became summer again. But that doesn't mean things got back to normal overnight. The population was weak and sick. The rains, yes, have gone, but they left bronchitis, tuberculosis, and mainly pneumonia as a reminder. It was already possible to plant again, but most of the seeds had been consumed in despair. Even livestock were practically extinct from peasant lands. After this period of cold and rain, which lasted from 1315 to 1317, the Great Famine continued for many years, ending only in 1322, when finally, slowly, year after year, the population regained all that had been lost. Slowly, the seeds multiplied and the animals bred. Exact statistics of the Middle Ages are difficult, but it is estimated that between 10 and 25% of the population of Northern Europe died at this time, from hunger, from cold, or from crimes. In short, because of the Great Famine or as a result of it. And this weakened population, already with a horrible life experience to tell, little did they know that they were about to be attacked again, and soon the Black Death was already lurking and waiting its turn. Definitely one of the worst times to be alive.